Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to the Poisoner's Almanac. I'm your co-host, Adam.
I'm Rebecca.
How you doing, sweetie?
Cold. It snowed.
Same.
It snowed out. It's still like 5.5 inches here, which is very different for us.
Lots of snow. Lots of snow. It was crazy. It only happens.
It happened last year too, though. So
Did it really?
It did, but
I
it was
that.
like, probably because we also had the hurricane.
Yeah.
And then we had the snow. I feel like that guy from like the Hercules movie. That's it. I'm moving to Sparta. Which is funny because there is a Sparta, Georgia, but I'm not moving there.
There is. All right. So let's jump right into it here. We got a couple of comments. Let's go from Spotify here to start.
Comments. Commence with the comments.
All right. Let's go to some comments here from YouTube. Let me pause the episode. It's literally playing in the YouTube player. Taoist32 says, here's a conspiracy theory. Epidemics are experiments on the effects of specific viruses on global population modified by scientists in various countries. That's definitely a conspiracy theory.
You said Taoist or Taoist?
Taoist.
Is it Taoist? T-A-O?
It's Tao, yeah.
I think it's Taoist, isn't it? Taoism?
Chris Woodcock says, Chris Smith. Christmas with a lisp. 'Twas the tism, my lord. And then I believe it's J87 Waldo says, there's definitely South and North British accents, LOL. I had a boss from Somerset, England. She sounded way different than the blokes from London. Excellent. Excellent points. All right, let's jump into some housekeeping for the old podcast. Be sure to follow and like, subscribe, share, wherever you're listening and watching. Leave us a 5-star review if that's applicable. Thank you in advance. Follow us on socials. The links for all of the socials are in the show notes. We got a Patreon link in the show notes if you want to support the podcast monthly, financially speaking. And one of the perks of being a patron at the lowest tier, the $1 a month tier, is getting called out by name on the podcast. Those people are as follows: 87 Pensgirl 71, Mara Santiago, Grace Lahan, Genevieve, Nahev Shatrit, Jay Went, Incan Hafner, Kiri Orsak, Tay of Sunshine, Monique, Sue Steves, Megan Geiler, Liz B, Willie Wolf NZ, Nicole Rivers, Richard Miyako, Sasha Rubel, Maya Shostag, Maggie's Yarn, Ogre the Viking, Lynn Rocket, Brett Moser, Zaid, Neil Houdini, Nicole Crane, Jefferson Vargas, Carmen Q, Sarah G, Knit Ninja, Estar, Olive Octopus, Betsy Rich, T-Bug, Christine Muljadi, Morgan Brittingham, Blaufrosch, a.k.a. Clara Jurisons, Vix, Anne-Maria Clyde, Jennifer Wilson Richter, Fidgety, Wendy G, Elena MK, Kaylin Martin, Pungrammed 101, Minnesota SPT, Tasha, Stuart Slattery, Simone Valdez, Christian Scradergard, Bonnie, Omadi, Rynell Alara, Kristen Arnold, Aaron Carey, Lynn Simpson, Melissa Emil, Desiree Davis, Jennifer Ramirez Johnson, Dalek Party, The Warped Witch, Dizzy Dancer, Creative Otter, Yadmith, Supergirl Sway, Rachel, Anya Brandt, Ebby, Leah Marie Matson, Lady Digitalis, Jesse, Shay 10, Julia Franzoni, Sparks, Gloria Eichmann, Thomas Huff, From Strings to Things, Soy Kasumi, Jessica Gasparini, Kate Lennon, and Donna Lanchanese, Lauren Smith, Anna G, Serpentine Fire, Melanie the SLP, Stuart Lee, Chris Millanak, Mackenzie Kennedy, Libby, Hetty, Huntapalooza, J Moon, Kelsey H, Paper Sky, Hannah Cook, Nikki Larkin, Campus R, Britt Clark, Paris Longer, Andrea, Shameless Agitator. What?
Campus R. R.
Oh, Campus R. R.
It's been a long week.
Ruby Salazar, Cassandra Smiles, Daniel Soar, Jasmine, Kapow 73, Dr. Doom, Maureen Hart, Justin Higgins, Nigel Hawkins, Judy Lowe, Nissa 16, Seamus Picked, Lisa, DW, Jesse Pollard, Sarah, Jahira, Everyday Delirium, Cody Griffith, April, Andrea Akrip, Alicia, Melefantastico, Panda Cannoli, and please welcome our newest patrons, Amber Golder, Donna Foley, Michelle Cornett, James Mills, and I'm going to attempt this. This is like a social media handle rather than a name. I think it's Teeth Weir or Teeth Wires, because there's a number 5 at the end that may signify an S. I'm not super sure. Please send us a DM somewhere and let us know how to say the screen name. But welcome to all the new patrons. That's going to bring us to today's episode, which is Unit 731.
Yes, we are
Part
talking.
1.
Yes, I'm finally here. Time to talk about some Unit 731. Now, this episode, we're going to be basically starting our journey into Japan's Unit 731 and basically what it is, how it got started, who basically got it started, that kind of thing. And yeah, now as secretive as the Nazis were with their goings on and concentration camps. Those who had put together and run Japan's Unit 731 were definitely more so. The number of concentration camps and the amount of killing and the rate of killings by the Nazis, especially towards more the end of the war, meant it really could not remain secret for too long. We've only recently learned a lot about what we know concerning Unit 731 because of cover-ups by both Japanese and U.S. governments. Why the U.S.? We'll come to that next episode. But the Japanese see the incident or the situation as shameful and would rather not talk about it or admit that it happened. And this is why it was not spoken of for some time, and why some occurrences were denied until proof was found. Okay. So how Unit 731 and how did oh my God.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you in the next one.
So how did Unit 731 and its activities remain secret for so long?
First of all, what is it?
You know anything about it?
No.
Oh, I assume you knew something. We're going to talk about exactly what it is. Okay.
This is blind react. Kids react to Unit 731.
Maybe not them. No. Maybe the adults react. Well, I'm getting to what it is, but just know that it was very secretive. And why was it very secretive?
One, it was wrong.
Well, it remained outside of most Japanese eyes, ears, and minds. Many people did not see things that were happening, and the only communication about these activities involved military personnel, researchers at Japanese universities, some students as well. We're going to talk about that as well, probably next episode because it gets weird, but also those who worked within the facilities. Now, even some of those working on site were not told what or who their strange jobs would affect. And when I say strange, we're going to cover that next episode too, because it goes into a lot of the gathering of things like fleas and things that would transmit certain illnesses, bio warfare agents, if you will. And a lot of these people, they needed to make money to eat. And so they're like, you may capture fleas. Okay. Like some of them knew like, this doesn't feel right. Something's not, there were rumors obviously about things going on, but a lot of the people that were involved in that part of it didn't know the details, if you will, weren't sure. They didn't know exactly what was happening. But another reason that the secret lasted so long was none of those that were imprisoned and experimented on in Unit 731 survived. None of them. No one survived. Right. Others who did know what was taking place were ordered and threatened to take the secret with them to the grave. And some did, but as we will hear later, others did not. Another difference with Japan's Unit 731 from Nazi Germany's camps, because that's what it was, similar to that, but not to the extent as the concentration camps were, like numerically and all that. Geographically, one of the main differences is like how they got started. The Nazis' plan from the beginning was to wipe out those of inferior races. There was obviously they had this conspiracy theory sort of blame game going on where they saw Jews, Poles, Romani peoples, and really any people of color or of different views as enemies, to be tortured and executed. Like these were not people they wanted around. And they saw themselves as, superior and having the right to do this. So the Japanese did see other groups around them, including the Chinese and Koreans, as inferior, but those in charge of Unit 731 really just wanted test subjects. And to them, these other people did not really matter. They were disposable. Also, Nazism was voted into power. If you remember, not all the people in Germany may have known the atrocities that were to come. Many
sounds familiar.
Many actually took part in attacking Jews living there, though, and stealing their homes, businesses, and personal effects. Like people that, were next door were like, yeah, let's join in this beating up of our neighbors. It was terrible. So, but anti-Semitic propaganda basically had blackened the hearts of those who at one time may have had friendly encounters with their Jewish neighbors. And like there's quotes out there that are like, it wasn't politicians that beat me. It wasn't this. It was my neighbor who did people's hair, who drug me out into the street. And because all of a sudden they believed they had this power to do so, this authority to do so.
Got them feeling brave.
Believing in all kinds of just nonsense. There were violent riots, deportations, beatings, and executions. And this was what the majority had voted for, whether they realized it at first or not. Most wanted better living conditions and financial situations, whatever the cost. And I would argue vehemently that choosing such over the freedom and or lives of others is as bad as leading others into such circumstances. It has unfortunately been a human fault to blame personal or even national circumstances on one group of people. I mean, you and I have both seen it in the personal lives of others, as well as throughout history. This group has what we want, therefore they must be taking it from us, right? This group is not experiencing as much pain or misfortune, so, it must be their fault. Like when the Black Plague was ripping through Europe, Jews and likely Muslims too were blamed for its presence because they were not becoming as sick in such high numbers, probably due to their rites that involved hygiene to a greater extent. Like some of their religious rites, it just involved hygiene, like make sure you wash one's hands before you go and do this. Like they were doing that more often.
Yeah, you're talking about Jewish religious. Yes.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
And I would say, Muslims as well, because I think they had similar, like the hygiene stuff was important, involved in their religion and history and stuff. So, but they were, there were attacks on Jews specifically in Europe because people believed that they had poisoned the wells and that's where the plague came from. Like they were, they were blaming it on them. But Unit 731 was started by a man who was both intelligent and persuasive. He was also ambitious, cruel, and psychopathic. He was a bit of a psychopath. So, and this is the stuff you want. What is Unit 731?
We come to it.
And who is behind it all?
Red Herring.
Oh my God. A pup named Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo. Okay. So this is also known as Manchurian Unit 731. This was a secret biological weapons research and development unit maintained by the Japanese Imperial Army. Now, Japan had already entered their second, I want to say it's Sino-Japanese War, before World War II started. There had been two of these. This I mentioned the second one. Basically, they invaded China, starting with Manchuria in 1931. Okay.
Yeah, Sino referring to China.
Yeah.
Yeah. I asked you this earlier today because I heard you use that term and I was like, well, what does Sino refer to? I hadn't heard that term before.
Yeah. And so the Japanese were a lot like, early Brits and US colonization. They were about it. They were like, we see them growing powerful by just conquering other nations and taking their territory. Let's do the same.
The amount of empires that have been, any country that could basically build empire.
Yeah. And I mean, Japan was really good at it.
Very.
So they were good at it until they weren't, and then they got better and they were good at it again. So now they had invaded China, like I said. Then they were in outright war by 1937. They had captured major cities, including Shanghai, barely, but they did. This was also the same year as the Nanjing massacre. You might have heard it said Nanking. But when I look up the city name, it's Nanjing.
Okay.
So I don't know anyway. But after the Battle of Nanjing, the massacre involved horrible war crimes by the Japanese against Chinese citizens, including mass sexual assault, torture of various kinds, looting, arson, and mass murder. And that won't be the only group doing that against another group that you'll hear that being a thing with. They engaged in killing contests while massacring entire villages. There were plans to also use mustard gas and incendiary bombs as well if they felt necessary, basically like as a plan B if that invasion went sour for them. Because like I said, they barely got Shanghai. The death toll was complicated to work out, but most historians and analysts of those events put it at about 200,000 plus deaths of this one incident. These war crimes in Nanjing went on for weeks to months before order was restored. Even a Nazi intervened to save civilians in China at this time. His name was John Rabe. He had joined the Nazi Party in 1934, and he was actually working for a tech company there in China. So he was already part of the Nazi movement at this time. But when this happened, he was working at a tech company in China. He and some other foreign nationals, mainly missionaries and businessmen, formed the Nanking Safety Zone as a place to house, feed, and care for Chinese refugees. Some were still kidnapped from the safety zone, but this action did protect 250,000 Chinese people from being tortured and massacred. So it was bad if a Nazi was one of the good guys. There you go. The subject of this massacre is really a whole subject in and of itself. So I'm going to keep going with the beginnings of Unit 731 because I did go on a whole rabbit trail looking all this up, but I'm going to keep going with what, because I don't want to, get on a whole new tangent. I often feel like Alice falling down the rabbit hole, when I research. So Japan had their own war and agenda going on at this time and had control over Chinese territories and the capture of Chinese POWs. I feel like this helps going forward because you're like, why are they in Manchuria? Where are they getting Chinese testing subjects? Because that is who they primarily used. There were others also experimented on at Unit 731 as well, including Korean prisoners of war, Korean people who were captured. I think some Russians as well. It was mostly Chinese and some Koreans as well. Japan actually had one of the most effective militaries in terms of keeping their soldiers alive, despite diseases normally seen in the field. And this went back to way before this, okay? They had somewhat perfected battlefield medicine, both preventative and curative. They had seen what they called the silent enemy, I think, which was disease. They had seen it take out more numbers in their armies than actual battle injuries, right? Not just their armies, but in other armies too. They're like, if we could get rid of this for this silent enemy, if you will, we'd have a much better chance at actually doing well in battle, right?
I want to ask what disease, but I feel like you're
well, different one. I mean, because they had fought in different areas too. So we're talking like mosquito,
malaria.
Yeah, like mosquito caused diseases. Yeah, and also like cholera, typhus. Yeah, so a bunch of different ones depending on where they were. There were even times that the Japanese military actually helped enemy soldiers that were left behind. They would dress their wounds and send them back to their side unharmed, like just out of honor. So there was times where they were just really good at keeping their soldiers healthier and, dressing wounds and just the medical side of things when it came to that. And honestly, a lot of other nations didn't really care about that. And there were times when they thought the Japanese weird or too sciencey, if you will. And they were like, why are they taking advice from doctors for their military? That doesn't make
Jesus Christ.
So they were actually...
How did we get into 2 world wars? I wonder.
They were actually, well up with a lot of the, disease prevention and things like that.
It's like that guy on TikTok that does those spoofs of old-timey ways of making. What's that? You got a fever? Show me your arm, kid. We're going to bleed you.
Oh, my God. Yeah. So, but yeah, their military leaders, they'd learned pretty quickly that disease could wipe out their numbers quite adequately and would damage any possible victory. Like I said, not many other nations even cared so much about the disease aspect until it began to make more economical sense. They realized they didn't have an infinite amount of people to fight for them. So yeah, such efficiency and care sounds admirable, and it is, but where there is progress, there will always be someone to twist it into something unrecognizable. So let me introduce Ishii Shiro. Born on June 25th, 1892, about 2 hours away from Tokyo, now Tokyo, in the village of Chiyoda. He was quite privileged for where he grew up, as his family was wealthy and well-connected. He attended Kyoto Imperial University beginning in 1910, where he was not very popular. He was actually known for being quite pushy, inconsiderate, selfish. He was known for his behavior just being this way. This was an institution that was known for its studies in bacteriology. And I mentioned earlier that he was ambitious, and this extended to climbing the professional ladder, the social ladder, even though he was kind of a jerk. I imagine he's masking those certain bad qualities about himself while he's doing that. But he was getting to know and charm beneficial connections, He graduated in 1920. He enlisted into the Army, where he was later made a lieutenant. And in 1922, he was transferred as requested to the 1st Army Hospital in Tokyo. He later made it back to Kyoto Imperial University, where he completed postgraduate work in bacteriology, along with some other areas that he was interested in. He made sure to make friends with the university president and even went on to marry his daughter And this kind of socializing outside of your status so abruptly and without invitation really was quite taboo for Japanese society of the day. I mean, it may still be seen as disrespectful, to be honest. I'm really not sure. I know like being polite and things like that is definitely something that they value. So Ishii wanted the military to adopt a biowarfare department, which is a bold ask considering that Japan had joined in signing the Geneva Convention in 1925, which prohibited the use of biological and chemical warfare. So, but Ishii had big plans for his ambitious love of bacteriology.
He was like, I'm going to do chemical warfare, actually.
And he played the long game. Like, he did not get, he had plenty of times where I feel like he could have been like, maybe not, but he stuck with it. He wanted to play a big role in Japan's military and political plans, okay? This would elevate him status-wise. It would earn him the respect that he craved from leaders and researchers alike. And he knew that economically, biological and chemical agents were cheaper than the building of large armies. They need housing, care, food, etc.
Wow.
The leadership,
My man.
So,
This is all bad red flags.
Yeah.
Why have an army when you can just anthrax them?
Absolutely. But also you got to have like equipment typically used in combat. And he was thinking of that too, right? Like he was like, why use tanks? So you can just kill them from the inside. Toss some germs in the river. Like that's what he's thinking. So, but this helps him sway those in top positions.
It's not this simpler?
Yeah, this helps him persuade those in top positions in the Japanese Imperial Army. Now, while illegal and immoral, biological and chemical weapons were effective, as I mentioned, they're economically efficient. So that's what he's like throwing out there to them. He also developed a water filtration device a little earlier on, and it's something that could be carried onto the field with soldiers. It could prevent such illnesses as cholera, because if you're drinking out of the river, you're drinking some unclean water, it really needs to be
what year is that?
Filtered. This is 1930s.
Not bad.
1930s-ish. Between 1920 and 1930s, because it gets used in 1937, like on the battlefield.
Yeah, well, that involves microbiology, germ theory.
I don't know exactly when he made it, because it did go through testing and he revamped it some and whatever. But he developed this water filtration device.
What an endearing psychopath.
Yeah, well, it's darkly amusing because he turns around later and wants to do the opposite. But here we are.
Okay.
Now this, like I said, would be successfully used in 1937 to protect Japanese soldiers from illness and hurting their chances in battle. They had suffered from bouts of cholera even while in battle, so not fun, I guess. But he was able to further his arguments basically by showing how his knowledge of such illness could help prevent them in Japan's own soldiers, right? It was not a difficult leap for him to suggest then that while protecting their soldiers, they could allow illnesses like cholera and plague to be their allies against their enemies. I mean, it's not really your fault if they catch it, right? I mean, it is your fault, but you can just throw it and not think about it again. Just, right? He's basically, apparently he's a very persuasive person. Of course, by allowing, he means intentionally exposing people to these pathogens. Now, one of the biggest threats Ishii could offer was knowledge. Powerful people without much knowledge tend to underestimate the power of such. As a part of a military program and with the use of his own funds, Ishii was actually sent to various other countries to learn about foreign military facilities. So beginning in 1928, he actually traveled for over 2 years to 20 European countries, Canada, and the US. He spent his travels studying other countries' history and involvement in biological and chemical warfare, such as the gases used in World War I. By the time he returned to Japan, he found more fertile ground for his ideas and ambitions, because by this time, nationalism was building within the country, as was this idea of the imperial army being the best and the nation its wealthiest.
The best army anybody's ever seen. Everybody knows it. Many are saying.
Ishii was...
hang on. This whole 2-year tour was strictly to lay the foundation for chemical warfare. I told you, he's playing
the long game. He's not going to outgrow this interest.
I feel like he'd be really good at Magic the Gathering.
It's too bad he went to something deadlier. Anyway, so he was able to convince the minister of the army, Araki Sadeo, that his path was the one that would lead to easy success against their enemies. And with his backing, all that was really needed was a facility, some workers, and subjects for Ishii's experiments on pathogens and poisons. It wasn't like Japan hadn't been researching chemical weapons already. On Okunoshima, this is a small island near Hiroshima, 1928. It was basically this island that was home to a factory. It was producing mustard gas on an experimental basis. Now, by the following few years, production had increased and also included other types of gases such as lewisite and cyanogen. And just for reference, lewisite is this really powerful arsenical blistering agent. Not fun. It's a chemical warfare agent, usually looks like this oily, colorless to brownish liquid with a geranium-like odor, like the plant. It causes immediate pain, skin blistering, and severe eye damage on contact. It can also cause respiratory problems like wheezing, coughing, sneezing, hoarseness, and bloody nose. If absorbed through the skin, it can lead to lewisite shock with basically symptoms of low blood pressure, vomiting, diarrhea, and restlessness. Cyanogen is your basic component of cyanide gases. It causes rapid respiratory failure, confusion, convulsions, and death. With cyanogen, this can actually bypass your standard gas mask filters. So now this whole thing was a project so shielded in secrecy that the whole island was removed from Japanese maps. This whole little factory of gases.
From the map?
Yeah, on Okunoshima. So that was going on already. They were just kind of like, oh, just kind of, researched a little bit.
If it's not on the map, nobody will look for it.
Yeah. Now, this plant actually supplied Unit 731 facilities later with poison gas for experiments. And there was a reported 2 million canisters of poison gas that was left behind when the site was abandoned, left behind in China. Now, there is a museum there now as a reminder of the activities there. And this is at Okunoshima, the activities in this factory, including photos of workers that had been scarred and disfigured by their work. So that's a thing now, too. Now, Japan, as I mentioned, occupied Manchuria in 1931, right? First taking control of the city of Mukden. Then they moved in to fight against the Chinese at Manchuria. Now, they had their own propaganda at the time, too, which, they used to justify their taking of these cities, mainly claiming that the Chinese had attacked them, so they were simply defending themselves and bringing order to these areas. In reality, the main reason for the invasion included the fact that China had begun to unify and resist under this nationalist leader, Zhang Jieshi, and the Soviets who had fought with Japan previously. But the Soviets were also pushing down with military force from the north. Manchuria, now in the hold of Japan, would be the site of the original Unit 731. By 1932, he was already working in a lab at the University of Tokyo. This lab was given the title of Epidemic Prevention Research, which was pretty misgiving because the main purpose was to research pathogens for their use in warfare. Now, Ishii knew and promoted this. He also knew that animal testing had its limits, and he was not a fan of limitations. Manchuria would provide the resources needed in terms of subjects, people. So he applied to the army so that he could be moved to Manchuria so that he could expand his research facilities. Now, a year later, he received a grant of land and a building in Tokyo for his research. And it was around this time that Japan pulled out of the UN, which basically meant they were not free to do what they wanted, but,
there wouldn't be any oversight from a multinational coalition.
Now, it would not be long before Ishii followed the army men into Manchuria to the city of Harbin. It was in this area that he and the Imperial Army basically planned and built a site that could imprison subjects and allow for uninterrupted experimentation and the disposal of humans. Now, just for some background of this area, because it's going to be important because people are going to be like, well, wait, where did the Russians come in on this? The area had been built up as a place for commerce by the Russians at this point. Okay, this is in China, having some alliance with the Chinese to do so before the Russo-Japanese War, at least. These Russian forces built the railroads that connected much of China with intended bylines to Korea as well. They didn't get that far, but the Manchurian Railroad and eventually the entire Trans-Siberian Railway was completed by the Russians with the intentions of connecting European Russia with the Far East. Okay,
which is the precursor to the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Let's not forget.
I don't even know about that, but okay. And it took a while for them to complete this. It was eventually, anyway. Now, this would enable significant, industrialization, settlement. And they really only got as far as railways from Moscow to Vladivostok to Chita And then from Port Arthur on the Liaodong Peninsula, where they had set up this Navy base, basically. They basically just parked some of their ships on into Harbin in Manchuria. Then the Russian Empire built the Chinese Eastern Railway, they had constructed this railway between 1897 and 1902 as a concession granted by Imperial China. It was built to connect Chita with Vladivostok and Port Arthur as a shortcut for the Trans-Siberian Railway. Now, there was also construction of the Circumbaikal Railway, which would make travel easier across that dangerous lake, Baikal, to make that easier. And Baikal is a subject all in itself. Japan was not cool with this development, as they saw Russia as this threat to their own power, right, and influence over Asia. They also still wanted Korea, but they'd been fighting with China over control for Korea. But Tsar Nicholas II, who was leading Russia at the time, was like, absolutely not. We're not letting you take Korea. And they had intended to connect, this rail line from South Manchuria down through the Korean peninsula to Busan to secure this sort of warm water port. But war officially broke out in February of 1904, and Japan took over the rail sites in that area before they could be really built. Now, technically, Japan declared war, but before Russia had received word of it, Japan attacked their fleet at Port Arthur. Apparently, they really liked the whole surprise attack thing, or they did, Tsar Nicholas II was apparently super shocked at this act of, this sort of surprise attack. And war between the two ensued, the Russo-Japanese War. And obviously it gets complicated. Germany backed Russia with the German Emperor Wilhelm II encouraging Nicholas II, who happened to be his cousin, to go hard after Asia. And he praised him as, his words, the savior of the white race. So here again with
that
racism.
tells me who I'm pulling for.
So here again, racism enters the scene.
Awesome.
And as Europe's defender from the quote-unquote yellow peril.
The what?
Yeah. Now, also, Wilhelm II also sent letters assuring the Tsar that God himself had chosen Russia to defend Europe from the alleged Asian threat. This quote-unquote yellow peril had been propaganda spreading throughout Germany from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, and this racist-based fear and hatred would lead to Chinese and Korean civilians being attacked by Russians as well. There was looting, arson, sexual assault, murder of civilians that Russian troops justified with this idea of them also being Asian and dangerous, therefore they're enemies as well against them, and that they should be punished, and it was awful.
All the things.
Meanwhile, Japan had an ally in Britain who was receiving information on the Germans through them. Like they were just giving each other information kind of secretly. Japan had their own propaganda basically to excuse their push to war. Throughout the war, Japanese propaganda presented this recurring theme of Japan as this civilized power, which supported free trade and would, allow foreign businesses into the resource-rich region of Manchuria, versus Russia, the uncivilized power that was, just wanted to keep the riches of Manchuria all to itself. Now, in reality, Russia was mostly interested in Manchuria and wanted to do their railroad stuff, right? Japan still wanted Korea along with other territory. Wilhelm did encourage Nicholas to also take Korea. I feel like Nicholas here is just okay, this is how he seems.
Yes, they do, Derek.
Okay. Japan believed that it could get the Brits and the Americans on their side if they portrayed this as a battle for free trade. Because,
because money. I know. We'll tell the Americans it's about money.
Huh.
And they'll be like, well, fine.
Japan had everybody's number, right? They knew what they were doing. It has also since been believed that Wilhelm was really looking to end Russia's ties with France, who did not support this war. So by telling Nicholas II that the Japanese were a danger to all of Europe and that Germany would join their fight if they chose to go to war, Wilhelm, basically wanted Russia to be allied with them, with the Germans. But he also wanted to eventually bring France to join them later. It was weird, okay? It was weird, okay? It's a lot of political strategy stuff that didn't really work out anyway. So Nicholas continued to fight against Japan with Wilhelm's promises of aid, which never really came. Wilhelm wrote a lot of letters to Nicholas, who just seemed really easily influenced by him. I have one cousin that I talked to among 16. And I'm like, why are you listening to this guy? He sounds toxic. Now, Russia was ultimately defeated. Their military was driven out of the area by the end of 1905, with some Russians remaining to continue building and maintaining the Manchurian Chinese Eastern Railway, and some Russian citizens choosing to remain in Harbin. Both Japan and Russia dealt with fallout from their own people afterwards for various reasons. The Russian Revolution occurring soon after this, and the Japanese were protesting how light the treaty had been against Russia. And some were blaming America for intervening because, President Theodore Roosevelt had basically assisted in these peace talks, treaty making. Most of the times when I read about these wars, it's like there's one guy that comes up and he's like, hey guys, now you stop it, right? And that's like, but then they end up in war with one of them later. Reading about some of these wars is exhausting. It's like, you went to war over what? Anyway, but basically, for just a little more context, Japan would take control of Korea in 1910 and would keep control over it and Taiwan until the end of World War II. Mm-hmm. So I just want to place some context here. So this is the Japan that Ishii was dealing with at the time. So there were still some Russian forces there, right? Not a lot, but some that were kind of around the railway areas, keeping that up. This is where and when he was putting together Unit 731. This is basically post-war, pre-war, pre-World War. I mean, a lot was going on. So tense would be a good word for the time. Now, that second Sino-Japanese war, as I mentioned, it escalated to full-scale war by 1937. The Japanese wanted to expand once again and take over nearby resources. So that's what they did. Now, after Japan's invasion of Manchuria, they had a special police force set up known as the Manchukuo police. Members were basically this Japanese-controlled, Chinese police of the area. It was made up of Chinese people, but the Japanese controlled them. It was basically a puppet sort of situation. Other police forces set up by the Japanese included the Kempeitai. This is an elite military police force that was honestly similar to the Nazis' Gestapo. Any sort of anti-Japanese sentiments was grounds for arrest. Now, these Kempeitai police were feared for good reason. They were authorized to arrest spies, resistance members, and suspects of various crimes. They were authorized to use torture to interrogate them. Now, in the context of Unit 731, they brought human subjects to be used for experiments. And there was the Kwantung Army, which was formed in 1906 to defend areas around the Manchurian Railway. Now, this army of sorts grew in number, strength, reputation over the years, and they played a controlling role in the political administration of the new state of Manchuria after it was seized, as well as in its defense. Now, they wound up under Ishii's command, also supporting Unit 731 and participating in their work in offensive bio and chemical warfare agents and human experimentation. So just trying to get all that information out of the way, because if I mention them, you're going to be who? But Ishii, as I mentioned, he started this operation in Harbin, but with the area being so urban and populated, he later decided they needed a more hidden area to practice in, right? So this Harbin lab was basically kept to respectable science, like vaccine research. At least what they told people. Soon, a section of land was selected just south of the city. And I'm not sure how to say this city's name. I'm going to try, but I could not find much information on it. I don't know that it ever came back from what they did to it. But I think it's Bayenhe, and military officials went into the small village. There were about 300 shops and homes. They basically told them all to get out. You got 3 days to get out. And that's what happened.
That's what we're doing.
So they used this, they basically used a large building there for living quarters as the lab facility was set up and built. Here, there were a lot of opportunities to procure subjects outside of prying eyes. They could literally arrest people, put them on the train that the Russians had built right there, bring them in by train and unload them there at the facility with not many people knowing. And so it also kind of helped avoid suspicion of those who would not appreciate his cult ambitions. The area was designated a military zone, and within a year, the site was complete. They had even built a small military airport near it. The facilities were built by Chinese laborers for very little pay, and everything was done in secrecy. The laborers were
very little pay.
Yeah, very little pay. The laborers
they should unionize.
Well, pretty sure they would have been shot. Now, the laborers were carefully watched by Japanese soldiers and were only allowed in certain areas. When the lab itself was being built, laborers carrying anything in had to wear baskets over their heads and be led in and back out by Japanese soldiers. Like they would have to carry things in, like being let in and then being let out before they could see anything. They weren't allowed to see anything. Some witnesses reported that Chinese laborers that were brought from elsewhere were forced to work inside the building and that those workers were actually killed afterwards. Now, facilities built included offices, living quarters, dining areas, warehouses, and a parking lot in one area, while another area contained prisons, laboratories, and crematoria. Yet another section of the site was used for storing munitions. Now, when it was complete, it was known as the Zhongma Fortress, standing within a 3-meter wall topped with barbed wire and high-voltage electrical wire.
Wait, you said 3 meter?
Yeah.
And so it was 9 feet tall, 9 or 10 feet tall.
And that's just the wall. I mean, there's other things inside, but it's topped with barbed wire and electrical wire. It was manned by armed guards 24/7, iron double doors, and even a drawbridge. So there's that. Civilians nearby were not allowed.
What do they call it? A herald? Whenever someone comes through the gate.
Hello, sir. I want to speak to your king.
Mr. and Mrs. What's Jim's name from The Office?
Halpert.
Yeah, Halpert. That episode where Dwight is the butler announcing Mr. and Mrs. Jim Halpert.
Oh my gosh. That was the one too where Andy, there's so much like secondhand embarrassment and all of that. But yeah, so civilians nearby were not allowed on or near the road in front of the site, and passing trains were required to close their blinds when passing. While these secrecy protocols were intense, it still became pretty well known by 1936 what was taking place there. There was rumors being spread about. People could actually hear screaming and things going on. Prisoners were made to wear leg shackles and sometimes like arm shackles, like around their wrists. They were normally adequately fed at first, with the intent being to keep them in a good state of health before experimentation, so they would be able to rule out any sort of variable of poor nutrition and whatnot. They wanted to make sure their experiments didn't have a sort of, variable that they couldn't remove. One of the many horrors experienced here included being bled to death slowly by the drawing of blood several times a day over days and weeks. Those going through this would become weaker and weaker. While this blood was sometimes used for research purposes, much of this was also just curiosity about how much blood could be drawn before death ensued. When some became too weak or useless to researchers, they were either injected with poison or killed with an axe blow to the head, after which the brain could be removed and experimented with or researched on. Witnesses reported that life expectancy at the fortress was about a month. Once you got there, some early experiments also tested how long people could go without food, only being given water, either plain or distilled, until they just starved to death. As impressive as this site was, it would not remain in use for all that long, like 5 years, I think. A group of prisoners that were sent there to have excessive blood draws decided to plan and make an escape. It was a pretty good-sized group, about 40 people, and led by a man named Lee. He planned the escape around the time of festivals, this festival that was happening, hoping that the guards would be distracted with like celebrations and, alcohol. Lee was able to knock out one guard while he was collecting utensils from prisoners, like later, and Lee grabbed his keys. He opened other cells, and basically those that were like with enough strength to join him did so. There were others that were just too weak from blood loss and had to be left behind. The prisoners' legs were still shackled, but their hands were free. And they had the weather on their side too, it seemed, as a heavy storm had actually knocked out the electricity to that wall's wirings. So they still had the barbed wire, but still. Mm-hmm. They made a human ladder with Lee at the bottom. Once the others were up and over, though, Lee remained behind, knowing that he couldn't get up over the wall himself. He basically was like, somebody has to get out of this, He was shot and killed there while the others made a run for it. About 10 more were shot and killed trying to escape, and close to 20 others were killed, recaptured, or died due to exposure, plus, previous blood loss while imprisoned, like that added to it. Just a few made it to a village to ask for help. And a man who encountered these escapees recounted his experience in a written interview back in 1984. I just wanted to read that part because it was kind of crazy. This person recalls, that night, I heard footsteps behind the house, then someone banging on the door. Outside, there were 7 men wearing leg shackles. My brother grabbed an axe to defend us, but when he heard their story, he put down the axe. We took them into a cave on the east side of the house, and we started breaking off the shackles. We were still working on them when the Japanese came to the edge of the village, tracking down the escapees. So we thought of a way to free them in faster. First, we broke off a shackle from just one leg so they could at least run while holding the other shackle, and then they left the village. So yeah, that was, his experience with that. But those who survived the escape did later meet up with and join resistance fighters, in the area. So now this escape, and the ruckus it caused, along with the secrets being made known, to those in the area, led officials and Ishii to move the site of their operation again. They built this place, and now they're like,
so they just abandoned it.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then people went in after, they abandoned it and saw things too, and were like, oh my God, So anyway, yeah. They didn't actually move very far. They kept to the railroad as it was a convenient way to receive prisoners and equipment. I actually had a thing in here too about, speaking of the Kempeitai officers. I said that's, they were actually handing over prisoners to be researched and stuff. There was a former Kempeitai officer from Dalian. I think I'm saying that right. I could be wrong. But he tells how the prisoners were handled, saying, we were the special handling forces of the Kempeitai in charge of taking prisoners for the experiments of 731. We knew the prisoners would be used in experiments and not come back. We tied them with ropes around their waists and their hands behind their backs. They couldn't move. We took them by train in a closed car. Then the Unit 731 truck would meet us at the station. It was a strange truck, black with no windows, a strange-looking vehicle. Here we go. But like I said, they didn't move very far. They kept to the railroad. They moved to Pingfang, which was closer to Harbin, and it was home to several villages that Ishii and the military forced out between 1936 and 1937 via eminent domain. Basically, people whose families had lived there for generations were made to sell their homes for pennies, basically, and were often made to leave before even being allowed to harvest any crops they had been growing, any of that. So yeah, all of their livelihood and their tie to the land just gone. Now, while the site built looked less like a fortress with its one-story buildings, there was a moat surrounding the headquarters. They had a moat. So that's interesting. A moat.
A mine.
This is no mine. This is a tomb.
They have a cave troll.
So also the airspace above and nearby was off limits to any planes other than those belonging to the Japanese army. Others were ordered to be shot down. It's crazy to me that this guy, Ishii, was able to climb his way up and have this much authority with the military and all that. So it was complete by 1939 and eventually comprised of 70 buildings on a 6 square kilometer set of land. It was walled in and guarded like the other site had been. Anyone approaching had to have a pass, not like a hall pass. Good. But yeah, inside the prisons were called row buildings as they resembled the square shape of the Japanese language character. Cells in the prison were built for either single or multiple occupants at a time and were arranged next to each other. They had one large window facing the corridor and a small opening through which they could extend their arms, prisoners, when ordered to for blood draws. The openings were close to the floor because it was already known that over time, the prisoners would not be able to stand after losing so much blood. The cells were kept clean with a flushing toilet, wooden floors, thick concrete walls. There was central heating and cooling as the temperatures in the region did range pretty widely, and healthy diets were planned out. They really wanted the prisoners their health to be normal, intact and everything to prevent inaccurate test results as they experimented on them. So the cells were in different blocks. Block 7 was for the male prisoners, and Block 8 was for women and children. And yes, children were included in experiments, and some of the children were born there.
Odd.
There were 3 large incinerators on site as well for the disposal of the dead. Prisoners became known throughout the facility as marutas. I think I'm saying that right. This is the Japanese word for logs. This originated when the site was being built, and those asking what the buildings were for were told that it was going to be a timber or a lumber company. One of the researchers darkly joked that the people were the logs.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode. We'll see you in the next one.
There's that.
That's terrible.
I do have a little bit of an excerpt here. And these are all shorter than the excerpts I read from the other thing, so have no fear. This was actually a researcher working under a leader of one of the teams that were organized. And he's actually talking about a research project that he worked on in this. Now this is, and it gets it does get pretty graphic. I'm only going to read part of it, but to these guards, the people in here have already lost all rights. Their names have been exchanged for just a number written across the front of their shirts and the name Maruta. They are referred to only as Maruta number X. They are counted not as one person or two persons, but one log or two logs. We are not concerned with where they are from or how they came here. This man looked like a farmer covered with grime. He was wasting away and his cheekbones protruded. His eyes glared out from the dirt and the tattered cotton clothes he was wrapped in. I called his number. No answer came. I motioned through the window at the other 4 prisoners to bring him over. They sat there without moving. I screamed abusively at them to hurry up and bring him over to the window. One of the guards pulled out a gun, aimed it at them, and screamed in Chinese. Resigned, they gently lifted up the other man and brought him over to the window. More important to me than the man's death was the blood flowing in the human guinea pig's body at the moment, just before his death. His hand was purplish, turning cold. He put his arm through the opening. I was elated, filled with sense of victory and holding down my inexpressible excitement, thinking forward to how the team leader would be awaiting these results. I reached for the hypodermic. I inserted the needle into the vein. It made a dull sound. I pulled the red-black blood into the hypodermic, 3 cubic centimeters, 5 cubic centimeters. His face became paler. Before he'd been moaning, now he could not even moan. His throat was making a tiny rasping sound like an insect. With resentment and anger in his eyes, he stared at me without even blinking. But that did not matter. I obtained a blood sample of 10 cubic centimeters. For people in lab work, this is ecstasy and one's calling to his profession. Showing compassion for a person's death pains was of no value to me.
Oh my God.
At the lab, I processed the blood sample quickly and then went back to look into the cell. His face occasionally twitched, his breath became shallower, and he went into his death throes. The other 4 men in the cell, who had the same fate awaiting them, could not contain their anger. They took water and poured it into the mouth of the dead man. This way, an irreplaceable life is trifled with to take the place of a guinea pig, and the result is 1 sheet of graph paper. 4 or 5 soldiers with drawn guns opened the doors to the cell. It made a heavy sound. They dragged the dead man out into the corridor, and loaded him onto a handcart. The other 4 men, knowing what their fate would be tomorrow, could not hold down the anger in their eyes as they watched their dead companion leave. The handcart disappeared into the direction of the dissection room, with a tall chimney looming above it. So, and that's just someone who actually was there as a researcher's assistant. Now, Ishii had a chance to actually cause some biowarfare chaos in the field as well, according to some witness recollections that were released in an article published by a Japanese newspaper in 1989. 3 previous Youth Corps members were interviewed and revealed that after Japan had taken heavy damage from the remaining Soviets in the area, 2 full-scale battles had basically broken out at Manchukuo border and the former Mongolian border, which is now known as the Nomonhan incident. That's what that battle was called. Now, Ishii and his cooperating Kwantung army devised a plan to use the nearby river as a means of attack using biowarfare, according to these reports. This was a sort of experiment in itself of use of biowarfare agents in the field. The plan was to release intestinal typhoid germs into the river to affect the Soviets that were camping downstream. The 3 men from the 1989 article gave details on the matter. According to one account, it says the upper reaches of the river were not far from the Japanese army camp. The group leader, Yamamoto's plan was to throw the pathogens into the river so that they would travel downstream to the Russo-Mongol army and infect the soldiers. We loaded the pathogens into 2 trucks and headed for the dumping area. There were 14 or 15 of us, including the leader. Over the next few days, we made 2 attempts to reach the river, but couldn't make it because of heavy Russian artillery fire and the trucks getting bogged down in soft ground. Then, on the 3rd try, we made it to the river. It was around early September. The location was 1 or 2 hours by truck from our camp, and we traveled at night without lights to a point near the dumping site. The pathogens were stored in 22 or 23 18-liter oil drums. The cans were tied with straw rope, and we carried 1 in each hand. We crossed over swampy grounds to the riverbank, watching the Soviet-Mongolian army's signal flares shooting up overhead from the opposite side. The pathogens were cultured in a vegetable gelatin. We opened the lids and poured the jelly-like contents of the cans into the river. We carried the cans back with us so we wouldn't leave any evidence. Okay. And this gets kind of complicated because of what they used. But now one of these men claimed that he had no idea what the agent released was, but believed later that it must have been typhoid after he had heard of a hygiene specialist from Special Operations dying of typhoid not long after the incident. Whether it was typhoid or not, this was a planned incident to use the water to carry some sort of pathogen. Now, there is a leading expert on Unit 731. He's also a professor at Kanagawa University. That's what I stumble on. University, excuse me. Suneishi Keiichi. He commented about this situation. The use of biowarfare at the Nomonhan incident is also recorded in testimony at the Khabarovsk military trials in 1949. But if intestinal typhoid germs are dumped into a river, they will become ineffective almost immediately. The Ishii unit people surely knew that. Rather than actually conducting biological warfare, it seems more likely that it was a method of gaining publicity for the unit as well as a drill. But the Nomonhan incident was definitely the first use of biological warfare by the Japanese army. If that's what they used, he's saying like it wouldn't have worked and maybe it was that. But then again, the guy was just saying, I think it was this. But now the site at Pingfang was not the only place where experimentations for Unit 731 were taking place. While Pingfang was the central site, there were other units set up in Beijing, Nanjing, Singapore. These also had their branch units in other areas. All of these sites were coordinated by Ishii's original headquarters back at the University of Tokyo, that because he retained that site as well. Pingfang was the most well-known when all this came out into the open, and information was really not released all at once or really quickly at all, like I mentioned. But the Unit 731 represents all facilities connected to the human experimentation that went on there. So it's not just this one site, but all of it that went on under Ishii and military control, and some that preceded it as well. So it wasn't just in one place, and there were around 20,000 personnel involved. People were actually brought to Pingfang from other sites, and each site actually had its specialty concerning experiments. And yeah, I'm actually planning on going into those actual sites and experiments and the nitty-gritty stuff next week. So, but I feel like there's some context here, also use of biological weapons, study of biological weapons. I know there's a good bit of history here too, but I feel like it really makes more sense if you know the context of where this is taking place. So yeah, it's this Ishii guy was great. He really wanted to poison people and experiment on people. And just a warning, it does get pretty brutal. So, and I will definitely put a trigger warning for the next episode because of that. So, yeah.
Awesome. All right. Thank you all so much for listening and watching for this episode. That's going to do it for now. We'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Bye.